Disconnect the call, Vance.
Ma'am, I'm still pressing.
Keep going, sweetheart. Push fast. I'm right here.
The call board flashed red, and 3 dispatchers turned to watch.
He is in critical condition. The ambulance is still minutes out.
You already dispatched the unit. Your job is finished.
A caller is alone. I am not abandoning that line.
You are not a nurse anymore. You are a dispatcher. Last chance. Hang up now.
If I hang up, he may not make it.
Then that is on the field team, not on you.
No. Right now, it is on this line.
You're fired, Vance! Hang up and get out right now!
Fine, I'll leave.
Then stand up.
After I finish this last call.
Center, EMS is on scene.
Stand by.
Checking rhythm now.
The whole room stopped moving.
Patient has a pulse back.
Oh my God.
Whoever stayed on this call kept him alive. Who handled this call? Procedure is still procedure. Pack your things, Vance.
I already saved what mattered.
Behind her, the 11-minute recording stayed glowing on the screen. Tierra's 10-hour shift had exactly 13 minutes left before it ended. The low hum of the server system and the main air conditioner in the corner created a flat, endless sound that pressed down on the exhaustion of the 8 employees working the night shift. On the shared dispatch screen, the call queue kept flashing amber, a sign that calls from Tulsa's working-class districts were rising as the night grew late. Tierra leaned back in her worn leather swivel chair and gently rubbed both sides of her temples. 6 years as an emergency room nurse at the city's public hospital had taught her how to push through headaches caused by lack of sleep, but she had been forced to leave that job 12 months earlier. The nonstop 12-hour hospital shifts with unpredictable hours meant she could not be home when her 9-year-old son, Micah, came back from school. He often had to sit alone in their old duplex apartment in Crutchfield, heat up instant noodles in the microwave by himself, and lock the front door before dark. Moving to this 9-1 dispatcher job, even with lower pay and no less emotional pressure, at least gave her a fixed schedule so she could see her son every morning. The electronic chip system on her desk gave a short beep, signaling that a new call had been automatically routed to her station. Tierra pulled the microphone closer to her mouth and took a deep breath, settling into the professional tone required for the job. 911 Tulsa, what is the address of your emergency? There was no immediate answer from the other end, only fast, shallow, panicked breathing. Then came a child's voice, trembling and thin, trying to push out each word between choking sobs. Mom, my daddy fell. He's on the kitchen floor and he's making a really weird sound. Tierra immediately sat up straight, her right hand moving the mouse to activate the mapping system. Hi, sweetheart, my name is Tierra. Can you tell me your name and where you are? I'm Journey. I don't know the house number. My house is up on the hill. It has a big black iron gate, but it's closed. The location screen showed one lonely green dot at the northern edge of the city, inside the isolated mansion area of wealthy families in Osage Hills. Most of that area was made up of private estates, spread across acres of land. There were no normal house numbers showing on the standard rescue map, only names of private internal roads. That area again? Hang up, Tierra. Brittany turned and whispered through the gap between the cubicle walls. There were 2 swatting calls from that hilltop area last week. Rich kids with too much free time playing phone pranks on their parents' phones. Don't let it hit your AHT. AHT was the iron ring hanging over every employee at District 9. According to national standards from the National Emergency Number Association, 90% of calls had to be answered within 15 seconds, and under Wade Kessler's management, this center's goal was for each dispatcher to dispatch the unit and end the call within 90 seconds to clear the queue. Tierra currently had the highest AHT in the whole center, averaging 128 seconds per call, simply because she always chose to stay on the line and guide people until the ambulance wheels actually stopped in front of their homes. Twice that year, Wade had written her up for staying on calls too long, on calls that later turned out to be harmless teen pranks. Wade Kessler stepped out of the glass manager's office, his eyes fixed on the electronic board hanging in the center of the wall, where Tierra's employee code had shifted from green to pale yellow, signaling that the call had already lasted longer than 2 minutes. Tierra did not care about Wade's stare. The clinical experience of a former emergency room nurse started working inside her brain. She heard no giggling in the child's background, no whispers from friends helping with a prank. There was only raw panic. Journey, listen to me. You are doing very well, Tierra kept her voice low and steady. Now, can you put the phone close to Daddy's mouth so I can hear the sound you told me about? Small feet ran across tile, then the phone shifted. Through the microphone, Tierra heard a string of harsh sounds rising from the throat. They were gasping chest sounds, broken, heavy, like snoring but dry, and stretched out every 4 or 5 seconds. A pulse jumped hard at the back of Tierra's neck. It was agonal breathing, the death gasp kind of breathing. This was not the breath of someone asleep or drunk. It was the last automatic reflex of the brainstem when the heart had stopped and the body was falling into serious oxygen loss. The man on the other end of the line was clinically dying. Journey, put the phone face up on the floor right beside you and turn on speaker. Tierra ordered while her left hand typed, activating a level 1 emergency dispatch for EMSA. I have sent the ambulance to you, but right now you and I have to help Daddy. But how long will the ambulance take, Mom? Daddy won't wake up. His eyes are open, but he's not looking at me, the little girl sobbed. Tierra looked at the update panel for the ambulance dispatch system. The nearest rescue station was 6 miles away, and worse, a truck rollover on the highway connecting the north side had created a traffic choke point nearly 2 miles long. The estimated time for the ambulance to reach the mansion gate was 9 minutes. 9 minutes. The human brain begins suffering irreversible damage from lack of oxygen after 4 minutes of cardiac arrest. The 5-minute gap in between was the line between a father waking up to hold his daughter again and a body lying on an intensive care bed, never waking again. The ambulance is coming, Journey, but you are the one right next to him, Tierra said, her fingers moving across the keyboard to search for the gate code from the security database based on what the child had stumbled through reading. Do you see Daddy moving or breathing normally? No. He just keeps making that raspy sound. Okay. Journey, do you know the button pressing game? I need you to kneel beside Daddy's chest. At that exact moment, a large shadow fell over Tierra's desk. Wade Kessler was now standing right behind her. He bent down and looked at the timer on her screen, which had reached 4.5 minutes. Vance, you already sent the unit, Wade said, his voice low but clearly threatening. The address is locked. The gate code has been updated into EMSA's system. Your job ends here. Disconnect and take the next call. We have 10 calls parked in the queue. The patient is in cardiac arrest, Wade. There is a 7-year-old child alone at the scene, Tierra replied, her hand still holding the mute key so Wade's voice would not travel to the other end of the line. The ambulance has the assignment. They will handle it when they arrive. Wade tapped his finger against the edge of her screen. You are not a nurse anymore. You are a dispatcher. Center procedure is clear. Once a unit is dispatched for a confirmed location case, the call must be released within 30 seconds to protect shift productivity. You are clogging the network. Tierra turned and looked straight into Wade's eyes. If I hang up, this man will die before the ambulance gets there, Tierra said, word by word. That is up to fate and the field medics. Wade raised his voice, his patience gone as the performance charts on the main board turned red. You already have 2 written warnings for call holding violations. I will not repeat myself a 3rd time. Disconnect immediately. A memory from 26 years earlier suddenly crashed into Tierra's mind like a fist against her chest. She had been 12 years old, sitting on the dusty wooden floor of a house in North Tulsa, her shaking hands gripping her father's sweat-soaked shirt after he collapsed from a sudden heart attack. She had called 911 from a rotary landline phone. The dispatcher that night had used a mechanical tone to tell her, the ambulance is on the way. Stay calm, and then place the call into silent hold. Tierra had sat there for 8 minutes in terrifying silence, watching her father's chest stop moving, never knowing that all she had needed to do was press down with both hands to help keep him alive. When the rescuers broke through the door, her father was already gone. The dispatcher that night had released her call to help someone else, but they had left a 12-year-old child alone with helplessness that would last a lifetime. Tierra looked at the screen. The words Journey age 7 looked like a mirror reflecting her own past straight back at her. She had not become a dispatcher to be a machine that pressed buttons and transferred calls. She had come here so no child in this city would have to go through the deadly 8 minutes of silence she had once survived. I am not hanging up, Tierra said. Wade Kessler took a step back. His face shifted from red to pale with anger at his subordinate's open disobedience in front of the entire night shift. He grabbed his coffee mug and slammed it down on her desk as a final warning. Plastic cracked. Dark brown liquid splashed onto the carpet under her feet and onto her headset. You're fired, Vance. Hang up and get the hell out of here right now. Wade's roar made Brittany and Dana flinch and turn away, pretending to be busy with their keyboards. Tierra did not blink at the loud noise. She lifted her hand and gently wiped a drop of coffee from the headset cushion, her eyes still locked on the screen showing the running time. She knew state labor law. She knew Wade firing her on the spot without HR procedure was an abuse of power. But she also knew that in this dispatch room, Wade was the law right now. Fine, I will leave, Tierra said, keeping her voice so flat that it made Wade's rage look childish. But only after I finished this last call. She released the mute key and focused fully on the headset where Journey's crying was starting to sound exhausted. Journey, I'm here. I'm still here with you. Tierra shifted into the warmest voice she could use. Can you hear me clearly, Sweet Pea? Yes. Mom, Daddy is so cold. I keep calling him, but he won't answer. Listen to my instructions, Journey. Put both of your hands on top of each other. Place them right in the middle of Daddy's chest between his nipples. Have you? Yes, I did. Now use all the weight in your body and push down hard. Push fast and strong, like you are pressing a big button on the floor. Push down and let go, again and again. Do not stop. I will count with you. 1, 2, 3, 4. Through the center's high-quality sound system, Tierra could hear the 7-year-old child panting as she tried to use her small strength to do chest compressions on a grown man 5 times her size. She heard the father's breastbone shift slightly under pressure. She heard the wood floor creak with every push. Wade Kessler stood beside her, holding the quick termination form, clicking his pen again and again in a sharp, impatient rhythm. He stared at the general call chart where another call had just gone into hold for more than 30 seconds because Tierra's station was not available to answer. He muttered something about lawsuits and major disciplinary violations, but Tierra had completely separated herself from the space of District 9. In her mind, there was only a strange kitchen in Osage Hills and a life-saving rhythm racing against time. "Mom, my arms are so tired. I can't do it anymore." Journey's voice twisted with tears, and the rhythm of the compressions began to slow, stretching out to one push every 3 seconds. That was the most dangerous moment, when the rescuer's exhaustion could collapse all the work that had come before. "Journey, listen to me." "Look at Daddy's face," Tierra said, her voice carrying a deep inner force that made the child on the other end pause. "You are doing something very important. When I was your age, my father fell down like this too. But back then, no one stayed on the phone to teach me what to do. I had to sit and watch my father go. Today, you are doing the thing I wish someone had taught me 50 years ago. You are the only one who can help keep Daddy here. Do not take your hands off, sweet pea. Stay with me. 1, 2, 3, 4. The child's sobs slowly faded, replaced by a small cry full of determination. The compression rhythm returned, steady with Tierra's count. On the dispatch screen, the green dot of the EMSA ambulance had just passed the traffic jam and turned onto the steep road leading up the hill. The call timer had reached 11 minutes. Suddenly, from the other end of the line came a loud sound, wood hitting hard and the pounding steps of heavy rescue boots. "Tulsa EMSA on scene. Move aside for me, little girl." It was the voice of Marcus Teague Washington, the mobile rescue team captain Tierra knew well from many shifts. Then came the clicking of a professional defibrillator, the sound of the cardiac monitor beginning to analyze the heart rhythm. Tierra held her breath, her fingers gripping the edge of the wooden desk so tightly that her fingertips turned white. The entire dispatch center seemed to sink lower in that moment. Even Wade Kessler stopped clicking his pen, his eyes fixed on Tierra's call status screen where the microphone was still open. 30-second silence passed like 3 centuries. Then the defibrillator alarm gave one long beep, followed by Teague's loud breath of relief through the internal radio line connected back to dispatch. "Center, do you copy? Patient has a pulse back. Sinus rhythm restored. That little girl maintained perfect CPR for the last 9 minutes. If we had been 3 minutes later, or if nobody had guided continuous compressions, we would have arrived just to sign a death certificate." Who handled this call? She just saved a life. The room at District 9 fell into absolute silence. Brittany slowly lowered one side of her headset and looked at Tierra with a complicated expression, half stunned and half ashamed. Dana lowered her head toward her keyboard, unable to look directly at the coworker she had been mocking behind her back 5 minutes earlier. Tierra slowly released the call key. She did not cheer. There was no victory smile on her lips. She simply removed the headset from her head and placed it neatly beside Wade Kessler's cracked ceramic mug. On the foam cushion of the headset, Wade's cold coffee stain had not yet fully dried. Wade Kessler's face turned gray. He straightened, snatched the quick termination form from the desk, and shoved it into the folder tucked under his arm. He did not take back his decision. The pride of a manager who worshipped systems would not allow him to admit he was wrong in front of the other employees. "Procedure is still procedure, Vance," Wade said, his voice smaller and rougher than before, though he still tried to sound like a man holding power. "You violated a direct order from your shift supervisor. Whether that man lived or died does not change the fact that you do not meet this center's performance standards. Pack your things." Tierra stood. She opened her desk drawer and took out a small wallet and a family of her and Micah when he was 7, set inside a cheap plastic frame with a scratched corner. She placed everything into an old canvas tote bag. She walked through the aisle between workstations. No one in the room looked at her. They all kept their eyes glued to their screens, as if the numbers there were the only thing protecting them from the cruelty of this life. When Tierra pushed open the heavy glass door of the center and stepped into the hallway, the tone of a new incoming call rang through the system again, steady, cold, and never-ending. Outside, Tulsa had already moved into a new day. The late-night November air carried a sharp cold that cut through Tierra's thin jacket. She walked to the empty parking lot, her shoes tapping against the gray concrete. She knew that tomorrow, when Micah woke up to get ready for school, she would have to tell her son that they no longer had steady income for the coming month, and that the rent notice for their Crutchfield apartment was already waiting on the kitchen shelf. But when Tierra sat behind the wheel of her old sedan and looked at her hands, still shaking slightly from the aftershock of those 11 minutes of counting a life back into rhythm, she did not cry. She started the engine and looked at the city lights reflecting faintly across the windshield, knowing deep down that tonight, somewhere on the hill of Osage Hills, there was a 7-year-old child who would not have to live with nightmares of silence the way Tierra had. The old car slowly rolled away from the District 9 building, while in another space, the invisible strings of fate had already begun tying the first knot around her life without her knowing it. 3 weeks later, winter air from the Midwest swept into Tulsa, carrying bitter winds along the concrete avenues of downtown. Inside the small office of a private pediatric clinic on the south side of the city, Tierra sat on a metal folding chair across from a white woman in her 40s wearing square-framed glasses, the head of human resources for the clinic system. The woman flipped through Tierra's resume again and again, stopping for a long time at the line, showing 6 years of emergency room nursing experience and complete advanced CPR certifications. It was a perfect resume, the kind any private clinic would want in order to raise its credibility. But when she clicked to check Tierra's reference from her most recent job in the citywide employment database, her eyebrows tightened. Ms. Vance, the HR manager, looked up, her voice carrying the polite regret of office people. Your clinical record is truly impressive, but I just checked the reference system from Tulsa Communications District 9. Your former shift manager, Mr. Kessler, entered your termination code as a Level 1 disciplinary violation. Gross insubordination and violation of critical safety protocols. You know the rules of our medical insurance and legal system. We cannot hire an employee with a history of refusing to follow a supervisor's direct order during emergency situations. I am very sorry. Tierra silently gathered the hard copy of her resume and placed it back into her handbag. This was already her 9th interview in 21 days. The pattern repeated almost word for word every time. The employer's initial excitement when they saw her 6 years of experience, followed by a cold headshake as soon as they looked up the termination code Wade Kessler had attached to her record in the statewide system. It was an invisible death sentence for her career in healthcare and public service. Wade had not only pushed her out of the District 9 building that night, he had built a blocking wall, cutting off every path of survival for her and her son in this city. After leaving the clinic, Tierra walked 3 blocks to the bus stop on Lewis Avenue. Her old sedan had been sitting in the garage of a mechanic she knew since the week before because she did not have the $240 needed to replace the dead alternator. Cold wind slipped through the gaps in her old wool coat, numbing her skin. She stood among a crowd of poor workers, night shift cleaners, and black construction workers silently waiting for the late bus, their faces carrying the tired, resigned look of people struggling at the bottom of the American economy. At 7:15 in the evening, Tierra finally reached her duplex apartment in Crutchfield. The neighborhood sat on the old edge of the city, where some streetlights worked and others did not, and where the train horn from the freight station in the distance sometimes wailed in long, lonely bursts. She opened the steps. The small kitchen was dark. Only the light from the street lamp came through the cloudy window and fell across the Formica dining table. On the table, a November rent reminder lay neatly beneath a stone paperweight. In the upper corner of the paper was a red stamp from the property management company, 5 days overdue. Payment required within 72 hours to avoid legal eviction proceedings. Tierra stepped to the sink and turned on the fluorescent light hanging above the kitchen shelf. The old bulb buzzed loudly twice before releasing a pale, flickering light. She opened the banking app on her cracked screen cell phone. The number in her checking account appeared clearly and coldly. 4289. All small, soft footsteps sounded from the back bedroom. Micah stepped out, still wearing old jeans worn thin at both knees and a gray hooded sweatshirt. He did not run over and hug her the way he usually did. He was 9 years old enough for a child raised in a single-mother household to understand the meaning of nighttime sighs and his mother's low-voiced phone calls with bill collectors. He bent down and quietly placed his school sneakers beside the door. Tierra followed his movement with her eyes, then froze at the sole of the right shoe. The rubber under the sole had peeled completely from the toe to the middle of the foot, revealing the gray fabric lining inside. He had wrapped a black rubber band around the toe a few times to keep the sole from slapping against the floor when he walked through the school hallway. But he had not told her about it all week. He knew his mother's wallet was empty. "You're home, Mom," Micah said softly, his voice rough from the start of a cold. "Yeah, baby, I'm home." Tierra walked closer, knelt in front of her son, and placed both hands on his thin shoulders. She looked at the rubber band wrapped around his shoe, and her throat tightened. A helpless, painful feeling rose in her chest. She was a nurse, a woman who had just helped keep a billionaire alive in Osage Hills. But right now she did not even have $30 to buy her son a new pair of shoes at the Walmart near their home. "Are you hungry, Micah?" Tierra asked, trying to keep her voice from shaking. The boy shook his head. His sensitive dark eyes looked straight into hers. He turned toward the dining table, where a small ceramic plate held half a piece of white bread spread with peanut butter, something he had made for himself earlier that afternoon. I'm not that hungry, Mom, Micah said, pushing the plate a few inches toward her. I saved half for you. Eat it and then rest. I already finished my homework. Tiara pulled her son into her arms and held his small back tightly under the buzzing fluorescent light of the kitchen. Her 9-year-old child was trying to learn how to grow up too soon, trying to hide even his most basic needs just to reduce the weight on his exhausted mother's shoulders. His quiet kindness did not make Tiara hurt less. It was like a mirror reflecting her failure to provide a stable life for her only child. At that moment, a dry, firm knock sounded from the front door, tearing through the silence of the apartment. Tiara let go of Micah, told him to go back to the bedroom, then walked toward the hallway. Through the small peephole in the wooden door, she saw a man wearing the dark blue uniform of the United States Postal Service. In his hands was a yellow file packet sealed with a red strip from the Tulsa City Court, an express letter requiring direct signature. Tiara opened the door and signed the postal worker's electronic scanner almost without thinking. When the door closed again, she leaned against the wood, her hands shaking as she tore open the sealed edge of the packet under the dim light of the entryway. Inside was an official legal document from the Appeals Board of the Oklahoma Employment Commission. The bold words on the first page froze her entire body. Notice of appeal and temporary suspension of unemployment benefits. Employer, Tulsa Communications District 9, represented by Shift Manager Wade Kessler, has filed an official objection against the unemployment claim of former employee Tiara Vance. The employer has provided evidence showing that the employee was terminated for willful misconduct resulting in serious consequences in violation of City Operational Safety Clause 402B. Decision: all temporary unemployment benefits of Tiara are suspended immediately as of receipt of this notice pending a legal hearing next month. Tiara's arms dropped. The legal document slid from her fingers and fell to the floor beside Micah's torn shoe tied together with a rubber band. Wade Kessler had not stopped at firing her. He had used the full strength of the city's administrative machine to cut off the last financial lifeline, pushing her and her son into complete despair with no way out, right in the cold heart of an American winter. The fluorescent bulb on the kitchen ceiling gave a loud pop and went out, leaving the room in the darkness of the Tulsa night, with only gray streetlight coming through the window, casting the lonely shapes of mother and son against walls that were growing colder. At the same time, orange warming lights in the intensive care unit of St. Francis Hospital shone down on clear silicone IV tubes. On the hospital bed, Nathaniel Brock slightly moved his fingers beneath the white blanket. The waves on the heart monitor moved in a steady rhythm, giving off low, warm beeps that showed his heart muscle had passed the critical stage. 6 hours after being brought into the emergency room, thanks to the unbroken chain of chest compressions from the kitchen in Osage Hills, neurologists confirmed that the cerebral cortex cells of the 45-year-old billionaire had suffered no oxygen-related damage at all. When the chief lawyer for Brock Flight Systems entered the room with a leather file in his hand, Nathaniel had already adjusted the bed upward so he could sit straight. His face was still pale, but his eyes had regained the sharpness of an aerospace engineer. "I want the name of the dispatcher that night," Nathaniel said, his voice low and rough but carrying a firmness that would not accept refusal. "Not an employee number. I want a real name." "Mr. Brock, District 9 Dispatch has very strict rules about protecting dispatcher identities," the lawyer said, lowering his head and carefully adjusting his glasses. "However, I have prepared an official letter of praise from the chairman's office along with a proposed $50,000 donation to their community outreach fund. I will deliver it directly to the night shift manager tonight." 10 hours later, the black Cadillac from the law office stopped in front of the District 9 administrative building. Wade Kessler welcomed the legal representative into his glass office with a carefully prepared, polite smile. He accepted the envelope sealed with Brock Corporation's embossed mark, but when the lawyer mentioned wanting to meet dispatcher number 14 in person to deliver the letter, Wade's smile froze for a tenth of a second. "We are honored to have served Mr. Brock." Wade placed the envelope on the wooden desk and slowly smoothed the front of his shirt, buying himself time to think. Unfortunately, dispatcher number 14, Miss Tiara Vance, submitted her resignation right after that night shift to handle personal matters in another state. She is no longer part of our staff. On behalf of management, I will transfer this donation into our call processing software upgrade category. Wade Kessler did not want any lawyer or any representative of the upper class digging into the night he had smashed a ceramic mug and screamed a termination order at an employee in the middle of a life or death call. If Brock Corporation found out that the person who saved their chairman's life had been fired for refusing to hang up, a media scandal would explode immediately and blow away the regional director position that he was only weeks away from reaching. As soon as the lawyer left, Wade opened a drawer, threw the praise letter into the shredder, and watched the words honoring courage turn into thin white strips of paper in the trash. When Nathaniel Brock received the lawyer's report that Tiara had voluntarily resigned and left, he did not answer. He sat in the library of his mansion, watching his 7-year-old daughter, Journey, draw crooked lines on the floor with crayons. The child was not drawing ordinary houses or trees. She was drawing a woman wearing a large headset, surrounded by red circles that she called life-saving buttons. Daddy Journey looked up, her clear eyes serious beyond her years. She promised me she would not hang up. She said she was always there with me. Why did she quit? Nathaniel stroked his daughter's hair. Suspicion began forming in the mind of a man who had spent his life analyzing technical failures in jet engine systems. Corporations and government agencies share a common language when they want to hide mistakes, and the phrase "resigned for personal reasons" was one of the most common filters. The next morning, Nathaniel did not use official corporate investigation channels. He accessed Tulsa's Public Records Archive himself, cross-referencing emergency rescue call logs released under the Freedom of Information Act for Level 1 medical incidents. As the direct person involved in the case, he had the right to request the timeline of the call from his daughter's phone. The data line on the screen appeared brutally clear. The call began at 11:47 p.m. The ambulance dispatch order was locked at 11:49 p.m., but the labor termination notice and the security card lock for employee 4892 Tierra Vance were automatically recorded by the HR system at 11:54 p.m. That was while the call was still happening. That was while Journey was using the full weight of her little hands to press down on his chest under Tierra's guidance. Nathaniel Brock leaned back in his chair and folded his hands together. That woman had not resigned. She had been fired while holding the lifeline that kept him alive, at the very moment District 9's system demanded that she let go to keep the performance numbers clean. The billionaire did not choose to call the mayor or send a team of lawyers to the District 9 building to create a loud confrontation. He knew people like Wade Kessler were very good at using procedural liability clauses to protect themselves during administrative investigations. To understand the true value of the woman who had saved him, he needed to see where she stood now, not through scrubbed personnel reports. Through someone he knew in the social services network of North Tulsa, Nathaniel learned that after being blacklisted from the city's major medical facilities, Tierra had taken a part-time shift at a small family diner called the Oasis Diner on Pine Street. It was a working-class area where rusted metal roofs sat between tire repair shops and cheap convenience stores. Late on a Thursday afternoon, an old Ford F-150 pickup truck with rust around the rear wheel well pulled into the diner's pothole-filled asphalt lot. Nathaniel Brock stepped out. He was not wearing custom suits from Chicago fashion houses. He wore rough jeans worn at the knees, a faded brown-gray canvas jacket worn at the elbows, and leather boots covered with construction site dust. He looked no different from a mechanic or subcontractor finishing a 10-hour shift at the workshops along the Arkansas River. The small brass bell on the diner door gave a dry clink when he pushed it open. The air inside smelled of frying grease, burnt diner coffee, and ground beef sizzling on a cast-iron grill. Tierra Vance stood behind the wooden counter covered in plastic laminate, holding a white cloth and wiping away leftover pomegranate juice stains from the surface. Nathaniel quietly chose a booth in the corner where the red vinyl cushion had a long tear patched with black electrical tape. He did not rush to order. He opened the yellowed plastic laminated menu, his eyes silently watching the woman move between the 5 tables in the diner. Tierra moved with a strange calm, a rhythm that carried no panic or frantic rush, even though she was doing minimum wage work to survive. At table 3, an older black man with hands trembling from Parkinson's was struggling to read the small printed prices beside the stew options. Tierra walked over. She did not stand above him and ask mechanical questions. She naturally knelt on one knee on the diner's dirty tile floor, brought her eyes level with his, and began reading each menu item out loud in a low, warm, steady voice. It was the same voice that had traveled through the speakerphone on Nathaniel's kitchen floor 3 weeks earlier. It was a sound that could not be faked, a voice frequency capable of calming a 7-year-old child's panic and giving dignity back to an old man who felt like a burden in a public space. Tierra stood, quickly wrote something in the small notebook tucked into her apron, then walked toward Nathaniel's table. She set down a glass of water and pulled a ballpoint pen from her pocket. "Hi there. Have you decided what you'd like?" Tierra asked, her eyes taking in his worn canvas jacket with the natural politeness of someone used to meeting every kind of person in an emergency room. "Black coffee, no sugar." Nathaniel looked up, his eyes locking onto the woman's face. He saw faint dark circles under her eyes, the marks of sleepless nights and the pressure of the eviction notice sitting on her kitchen shelf. But in those eyes there was not a trace of self-pity or a request for sympathy. "Coffee will be out in a minute," she said, then turned toward the coffee machine at the end of the counter. When Tierra came back with the glass pot of dark liquid, Nathaniel did not let her leave right away. He tapped his fingers lightly on the formica table, creating a slow rhythm. "I hear this area hasn't been too safe lately," Nathaniel began naturally, his voice carrying the tone of a Midwestern man raised around farms. "I have a few kids at home. Sometimes when I work late shifts like this, I get worried." Tierra stopped after filling his cup. She set the glass pot down on a rubber mat and looked out the window, where the gray Tulsa sunset was fading behind high-voltage power lines. "Children are more sensitive than we think, sir," Tiara said, her voice thoughtful but still professionally distant. "I have a 9-year-old son. Kids don't need us to be rich. They just need to know that no matter what happens, the door at home will open and somebody will be standing there. A child's fear always begins with silence." Nathaniel tightened his grip around the ceramic cup, feeling the heat of the coffee through the thick wall. Her sentence was not written in any behavioral psychology textbook, but it perfectly reflected what his daughter Jorni had gone through that night. Tiara had not only guided physical action, she had used her voice to fill the terrifying gap of rescue silence. "My name is Nate." Nathaniel extended his right hand toward her. His palm had real calluses from the years when he personally welded engine modules in the factory. "I just moved back to the north side after a few family troubles. My wife died 3 years ago, and my daughter recently went through a serious health scare. I almost lost her." Tiara looked at the man's hand, then slowly reached out and shook it. The empathy of a single mother, of a person who had watched hundreds of life and death lines, would not let her ignore a father carrying similar emotional wounds. "I'm Tiara," she said softly. "I'm sorry for your loss. I understand that feeling, Nate. The feeling of standing alone in a room, looking at your child and wondering if you will still have enough strength tomorrow to protect them. It is a very frightening kind of loneliness." They sat and talked that way for nearly 15 minutes as the diner began to empty. Nathaniel never mentioned Brock flight systems, never mentioned 9-figure bank accounts or the hundreds of millions of dollars in military drone projects he owned. He simply listened as she talked about Micah, about the broken key electronic keyboard the boy still tried to use to make small melodies at night, and about her dream of a real community medical training program for parents in poor neighborhoods, where ambulances always arrive 10 minutes later than they did in rich areas. "I have a few friends on the board of a regional nonprofit health organization," Nathaniel said, leaning forward, his voice becoming lower and more serious. "They call it the Oklahoma Resiliency Project. They are looking for a position called Lead Curriculum Director, someone to build emergency response training for schools and low-income communities. They need someone with real clinical experience. But more importantly, they need someone who understands the cost of staying on the line." Tiara gave a small, sad smile. She looked down at her grease-stained apron. "Thank you, Nate, but my record has a big mark on it now. I was just fired from the city's 911 center for violating safety procedure. No official organization is going to hire someone stamped with gross insubordination in the state reference system. Apply anyway, Tiara." Nathaniel stood and placed a $20 bill on the table, far more than the price of a black coffee, but just enough not to wound her pride as charity. Sometimes the people who lead those nonprofit funds do not look at what one shift manager wrote on paper. They look at what you left behind after a call. "I will tell them I know a nurse who once knelt on the floor just to read a menu to an old man." 4 days later, Tiara Vance stepped into the main lobby of the St. John Medical Pavilion, a glass and steel structure in downtown Tulsa. She wore the only pair of black dress pants she still had that looked pressed and the teal blouse she usually wore to Micah's parent meetings. Her heart beat fast with every movement of the high-speed elevator as it carried her to the 14th floor. She pushed open the oak door leading into the board office of the Oklahoma Resiliency Project. Inside, a large walnut conference table stretched from one end of the room to the other. Around it sat 4 interviewers dressed in expensive business clothes, 2 state cardiologists, 1 financial specialist from the foundation, and a woman representing the Oklahoma Department of Health. The interview lasted 45 minutes with extremely difficult professional questions about TCPR protocols and how to build rapid response modules for the public school system. Tiara answered with the deep understanding of someone who had stood in all 3 positions: an emergency room nurse, a 911 dispatcher, and a 12-year-old child who once helplessly watched her father die. Her excellence in clinical thinking made the interviewers keep writing notes on their tablets and nodding in approval. However, when the interview reached its final minutes, the woman from the Department of Health turned to the last page of the electronic file, where the red Tulsa code showed Tiara's termination status at District 9. The woman took off her reading glasses and looked at Tiara with worried eyes. "Vance, your professional ability and community vision are far beyond all the candidates we have met this week," the woman said, her voice lowering. "But we are an organization funded by major trusts and monitored by the state. Your file clearly says you were terminated for knowingly refusing a direct order from a shift supervisor during a Level 1 emergency incident. If we appoint you as program director, this will create a major legal risk for us when working with school system contracts. Can you explain why Mr. Wade Kessler entered such a serious conclusion?" Tiara looked down at her hands, tightly clasped in her lap. She knew this moment would come. The wall of the administrative system had risen in front of her again, cold, solid, and emotionless. She could not deny that she had refused to hang up. She could not deny that she had violated Wade's 90-second rule. Tiara began, her voice catching in her throat as emotional exhaustion rose up, making her want to stand and leave the room and return to her job at the Oasis Diner. I did not hang up because, at that moment, the soft click of the wooden door behind the boardroom sounded. All 4 interviewers stood at once, straightening their backs and adjusting their jackets with absolute respect toward the person who had just entered. Tiara turned by reflex. The man walking through the door was not the one in the worn canvas jacket and dusty leather boots from the Oasis Diner 4 days earlier. The man entering the room now moved with long, steady strides in a fine charcoal blue 3-piece tailored suit. White gold cufflinks flashed beneath the boardroom chandelier. His face was clean-shaven, his hair neatly styled, and he carried the natural power of someone who held the economic lifeblood of an entire aerospace industrial region. Nathaniel Brock did not look at the interviewers. He walked straight to the head of the conference table, where the leather chair carried the emblem of the founding donor of the Resiliency Project Trust. He pulled the chair out, placed a leather file on the table, then slowly lifted his eyes to look directly at Tiara Vance, who stood frozen in the middle of the room. "I will answer that question for the candidate," Nathaniel said. His voice was no longer the warm, low voice of the mechanic named Nate. It was now a steel-hard voice, the voice of a corporate chairman echoing through the room. She refused to hang up because if she had followed Wade Kessler's damn 90-second procedure that night, the chairman's seat of this foundation would be empty right now. Nathaniel Brock's voice rang out, firm and cold, striking the leather-covered walls of the boardroom at St. John Medical Pavilion. The 4 interviewers along the walnut table froze at the same time, their fingers stopped midair above their tablets. The woman representing the Oklahoma Department of Health slowly placed her marker pen on the table, her eyes moving from Tiara's electronic file with its red termination code to the hard face of the aerospace billionaire. Tiara Vance still stood motionless in the middle of the room, both hands gripping the canvas handbag on her lap. Under the chandelier light, Nathaniel's fine charcoal suit reflected absolute power, a power completely different from the man in the worn canvas jacket who had sat across from her at the Oasis Diner 4 days earlier. She looked at him, her lips moving slightly, but no words came out. Her clinical brain was trying to piece together the memories of the man named Nate with the powerful chairman standing at the head of the table. Members of the board, Nathaniel took one step forward and placed both large, calloused palms on the polished wood, looking straight at the state cardiologist. The candidate in front of you did not violate any safety procedure that should make her a legal risk. She preserved a life while the administrative system of District 9 was trying to optimize a soulless data board. The full 11 minutes of that call were not a disciplinary stain. They are the reason I am standing here today. He turned to Tiara, and the steel in his eyes suddenly softened, carrying the deep gratitude of a father who had been given another chance to hold his daughter. "I am sorry I did not introduce my true identity at the diner, Tiara," Nathaniel said, his voice deep and resonant. "I needed to know you as a mother, as a worker, not as someone responding to a corporate check. And what I saw in that diner confirmed one thing. The recording of your call on the night of November 11th was not luck. As of this morning, I have purchased the rights to that 11-minute recording from the city's public archive and turned it into standard training material for the entire rescue system of the Oklahoma Resiliency Project." The woman from the Department of Health cleared her throat and quickly flipped through the trust funding terms on her screen. "Mr. Brock, if you confirm that Ms. Vance was the dispatcher who directly handled your family's emergency call, then as the founding donor of the foundation, we can absolutely disregard the city reference code. The lead curriculum director position belongs to her." Nathaniel nodded and pushed the leather file toward his assistant. "Ms. Vance's contract will begin tomorrow with full executive director level salary and comprehensive high-tier health insurance for her family. In addition, the Brock Corporate Law Office has completed the process of setting up a full music scholarship fund at Tulsa Arts Academy under the name Micah Vance. Her son will have the best piano and the best teachers starting next week." Tiara stood still as a hot tear rolled down her cheek and fell onto the strap of her handbag. It was not a tear of weakness. It was the release of a mother who had spent 4 weeks staring at $42 in her bank account and the rubber band holding together her son's torn shoe. She did not need charity, and Nathaniel had given her the thing she wanted most, dignity restored by her own clinical ability. 6 months later, at the Tulsa City Convention Center, the stage lights of the Midwest Emergency Communications Management Conference shone brightly. Wade Kessler stood behind the faux leather wooden podium, his dark blue tie knotted perfectly. On the large screen behind him, bar charts showed that District 9's AHT had dropped another 4% in that last quarter, making his center the fastest call clearing unit in the state. In 2 days, the Regional Executive Committee would announce its decision for the regional director position, and Wade knew his name was at the top of the list. The success of a rescue system does not lie in personal emotion, Wade declared into the microphone, both hands gripping the sides of the podium. It lies in the discipline of numbers. Every second we save on one call is an opportunity given to the next person in the queue. That is the philosophy District 9 has applied to save. The double oak doors at the back of the hall were suddenly pushed open hard. The loud sound made more than 200 delegates sitting below turn their heads at once. 4 inspectors from the Oklahoma Department of Health entered, wearing dark blue windbreakers printed with the words State Auditor in reflective yellow. Behind them came 2 investigators from the State Attorney's Office and Rescue Captain Marcus Teague, Washington. There was no warning, no diplomatic procedure from management circles. They walked firmly down the aisle between the rows of chairs, heading straight toward the stage where Wade stood. The lead inspector stepped onto the stage, pulled out a document with the raised seal of the state court, and placed it directly on the podium on top of Wade's notes. "Mr. Wade Kessler," the lead inspector said, his voice amplified by the lapel microphone and echoing through the hall. "Your hearing is canceled. An emergency audit and forensic audit order for the entire call data storage system of Tulsa District 9 was signed by a state Supreme Court judge 2 hours ago. You are required to step away from the podium and come with us to the operations room." Wade Kessler's face instantly shifted from healthy red to ashen gray. He looked down at the order, his hands gripping the podium and beginning to shake without control. "There must be some mistake here. My numbers are completely transparent and have already been internally audited. Your internal audit does not include the hidden files deleted from the main server, Mr. Kessler." The lead inspector cut in coldly, signaling for 2 investigators to step up and stand on either side of him. 15 minutes later, inside the closed board meeting room at District 9 headquarters, white fluorescent lights shone down on the long table, where state IT engineers were connecting a portable hard drive to the central projector system. Wade Kessler sat at the corner of the table, his tie loosened, sweat covering his forehead. The lead inspector pressed play. The projector screen showed an audio file with a hidden code. AM11111 deleted. 3 weeks ago, our office received a backup drive from an internal quality control analyst at this center. Someone who secretly kept the original files out of professional conscience after witnessing what you did, the inspector said, looking straight at Wade. "Now let us listen again to what you called number optimization." Static crackled through the ceiling speakers, followed by the trembling voice of 7-year-old Journey. "Mom, my daddy fell. He's on the kitchen floor." Then came the thick, dry sound of agonal breathing. The entire meeting room went silent. Even the state investigators, who had heard hundreds of cases, held their breath at the sound of death coming close. Then a sharp chain of sounds appeared. Wade's ceramic mug slamming down on the desk, his screaming voice cutting through the space. "You're fired, Vance. Hang up and get the hell out of here right now. Procedure is procedure." Tierra Vance's flat, unshakable voice followed right after. "I will leave, but only after I finish this last call." The lead inspector turned off the audio file, and the room returned to a terrifying silence. He pushed a file more than 300 pages thick toward Wade. "Our digital investigation shows that over the past 2 years, in order to lower AHT by 18% for the purpose of supporting your promotion record, you set up an automatic filter in the system. Any call from low-income areas or any complex case that required TCPR guidance lasting longer than 90 seconds was forced to disconnect by you or your trusted staff under the labels of suspected prank or automatic transfer. We have identified at least 14 cases in which patients died or suffered permanent brain damage because ambulances arrived late without CPR support from dispatch. You deleted these audio files from the reports sent to the state. At that moment, the chief lawyer for Brock Flight Systems stepped into the room and placed another civil file on the table. On behalf of Mr. Nathaniel Brock and the corporation's board of directors, we are officially filing a $15 million civil lawsuit against Wade Kessler personally and against District 9 management for deliberate concealment of information, destruction of legal evidence, and serious endangerment through reckless conduct. If the case is won, the full compensation amount will be transferred directly into a fund for building medical relief stations in North Tulsa. Wade Kessler completely collapsed. He sat frozen in the swivel chair, his empty eyes fixed on the audio track on the projector screen. His career, the regional director seat, and the entire number system he had worshipped like a religion shattered under the weight of the 11-minute recording he had once tried to destroy. Under Oklahoma public safety management law, falsifying Level 1 emergency data would permanently strip him of his professional certification and move his case into criminal charges with a possible sentence of up to 7 years in prison. At the same time, in District 9's main operations room, usually called the bullpen, the glass door swung open. 2 employees from the city HR department entered, accompanied by cybersecurity engineers. They walked straight to Brittany's and Dana's workstations. "Stand up from your chairs and take your hands off the keyboards," the HR manager said, her voice cold and professional. Brittany jumped to her feet, her headset slipping off and falling onto the desk. Her face went pale when she saw two security staff members begin inserting encrypted USB locks into her computer. I was just following Wade's orders, Brittany stammered, her lips shaking as she saw the other dispatchers on shift turning to look at her. He was the one who signed Tiara's termination. I had nothing to do with it. The login system shows that you personally pressed the forced transfer button to disconnect 4 emergency calls last month under Kessler's productivity increase directive. The cybersecurity engineer said, eyes fixed on the screen running lockout code. All system accounts belonging to you and Dana are suspended immediately. Both of you are on the state attorney's summons list for the criminal negligence investigation. Pack your personal belongings into boxes and leave the building. Dana sat frozen, both hands covering her face, late tears of regret running through her fingers. She knew that being pulled into a criminal case involving 911 services meant their names would be permanently marked across the entire country. The people who had mocked Tiara behind her back, the people who had chosen silence to protect their chairs and bonuses, now had to stand in line to receive empty cardboard boxes, the same kind of box they had watched Tiara carry out 6 months earlier. Half an hour later, in the parking lot behind the Tulsa City Administration Building, the winter afternoon sun was sinking behind concrete blocks, casting pale orange-yellow light over puddles of rainwater covered with a thin layer of ice. Wade Kessler stepped out through the emergency exit, both arms holding a gray plastic box containing a few management notebooks, a glass paperweight, and a cracked plastic desk nameplate. He walked unsteadily toward his SUV, looking 10 years older than he had when he stood on the conference stage. He stopped when he saw a luxurious black Lincoln Navigator idling quietly near the exit. The rear window rolled down. Tiara Vance was sitting inside. She wore an elegant cream wool coat, her hair neatly pinned up, carrying the complete calm and ease of someone who had crossed through the darkest part of her life. She was on her way to pick up Micah from his piano lesson at the Arts Academy. Wade looked at her, his eyes filled with red lines of desperation mixed with resentment. He hugged the plastic box tightly against his chest and stepped closer to the vehicle. His voice was hoarse, trying to find one final excuse for his rotted conscience. "Vance, you think you won, don't you?" Wade said, clenching his teeth to stop himself from shouting. "I worked at that center for 12 years. I had to manage a network of 800 calls a day with a budget that kept getting cut. I didn't have time to be a therapist for every kid, Vance. I protected the queue. I protected the process. It was just math, do you understand? It was just numbers." Tara looked at the man standing in the cold of the city parking lot, holding his box of personal belongings. A box that looked no different from the one she had once carried. There was no satisfaction in her eyes, no victory smile, and no anger from the past. There was only emptiness, a deep silence from someone who had seen the true cost of cruelty. She adjusted the collar of her coat and looked straight at Wade's face, twisted with stress, then answered in a low, flat, firm voice, as steady as the life-saving count from that night. "It was not math, Wade. It was a human being, and that is why you are holding that box today." The car window slowly rose, fully separating Wade Kessler's gray face from the warm space inside. The Lincoln Navigator pulled forward and glided smoothly through the parking lot exit, leaving the former shift manager standing alone among the frozen puddles, while an ambulance siren wailed in the distance, echoing through the cold Tulsa air. Bubble wrap popped softly in the sun-filled living room of the small mid-century house in a Tulsa suburb. Tiara Vance stood beside the window ledge, holding a stack of old medical books, looking out at the small front yard where green grass was beginning to take root after the early summer rains. There had been no flashy move into luxury mansions or gated estates of the super-rich. This house was modest, with clean cream-colored walls, located only 4 blocks from Tulsa Arts Academy. The only real difference from the old Crutchfield apartment was the quiet. In the clean kitchen, a brand-new GE refrigerator ran smoothly, with none of the squealing or rattling sounds that used to interrupt their sleep at night. In the middle of the living room, a glossy black ebony upright piano stood proudly, its white keys reflecting sunlight through the large glass window. Micah walked toward the piano, placing his brand-new perfectly fitting Nike sneakers on the oak floor. He no longer had to wrap black rubber bands around the toes of his shoes to keep the soles from slapping against the school hallway floor. He pressed one finger lightly on the middle C key. A clear, ringing sound spread through the room, filling the house with the frequency of safety. "Mom," Micah looked up, his sensitive dark eyes resting on Tiara. "The teacher at the academy said my finger structure is really good for Chopin's classical pieces. He asked if I wanted to join the fall recital." Tiara walked closer, set the stack of books on the wooden table beside the piano, and gently stroked her son's neatly trimmed hair. "If you want to, baby. We have all the time in the world to practice." 1 year later, the relationship between Nathaniel Brock and Tiara Vance did not grow according to the rushed romantic patterns of Hollywood television dramas. It was not built on luxury trips or candlelit dinners at 5-star restaurants in Chicago. Their bond formed slowly, rooted in the deep respect of two people who had both gone through dark places of loneliness and family wounds. On a Saturday evening, in the kitchen of the new house, Nathaniel sat at the wooden dining table, still wearing a simple shirt with sleeves rolled past his elbows. In the living room on the thick felt rug, Micah and Journey sat beside each other with fourth-grade math workbooks open in front of them. The billionaire's 7-year-old daughter had grown a little. Her cheeks were rosy, and her giggles rang out each time Micah showed her how to solve a long multiplication problem. Tiara placed 2 cups of hot chamomile tea on the table and sat in the chair across from Nathaniel. They did not talk about aerospace projects or financial numbers from Brock Flight Systems. They looked toward the 2 children and listened to the soft scratching of pencils on paper. "Today, Journey told me she no longer dreams about those raspy sounds in the dark," Nathaniel said, his voice low and deep, carrying the raw relief of a father. "She said Micah's piano chased those sounds away." Tiara settled the ceramic cup in her hands, feeling the warmth soak into her skin. "Children have an amazing way of healing, Nathaniel. We just have to give them an environment without the panic of countdown clocks. A parent's stability is the best medicine for a child." Nathaniel looked at Tiara's hands, the fingers that had once performed precise medical procedures and had once held down the mute key to protect a call. The state court just sent the final notice on the Kessler case. All of his personal assets and bond funds have been frozen to prepare compensation for the North Tulsa Medical Fund. The administrative system had to step back before the truth, Tiara. Tiara looked up, her calm eyes turning toward the quiet city night beyond the window. "I do not feel happy about his downfall, Nathaniel. I only feel lighter because from today on, my old coworkers at District 9 will have one less hand pressing down on their headsets. They will have 30 more seconds to hear a breath that might save a life." The next morning, at the new headquarters of the Oklahoma Resiliency Project, Tiara walked down the terrazzo-tiled hallway of the community medical building. Her heels made steady, confident sounds. On the wooden door of her office, a small brass sign was engraved with the words, "Tiara Vance, lead curriculum director." She opened the door and stepped into the central training room. It was a large space filled with light from floor-to-ceiling windows. On the non-slip rubber floor, 30 CPR half-body training mannequins were arranged in straight rows. Around them sat 30 students, single mothers, fathers who worked as mechanics, bus drivers from poor working neighborhoods in North Tulsa. They represented the class of people who always had to wait for ambulances that arrived 10 minutes late because of geographic barriers and poor transportation infrastructure. Tiara stepped onto the teaching platform. She did not use thick textbooks or presentations full of academic terms. She looked at the tired but hopeful faces in front of her, then knelt on one knee beside the first mannequin. She placed one hand over the other, setting them exactly at the center of the mannequin's chest. In the first row, a 12-year-old black girl with small braids and wide dark eyes watched every movement Tiara made. The child wore an old public school t-shirt, and her hands trembled as she tried to copy Tiara's hand placement. "Look at my hands, baby girl," Tiara kept her voice low and steady, the kind of tone that could move through a child's fear. "Don't be afraid of hurting the model. You have to push hard from your shoulders using the full weight of your upper body. Press down 2 inches and release right away. Count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's right. Very good rhythm. Keep that speed for me." Tiara stood and took one step back, giving the 12-year-old girl space to do it herself. The clicking spring inside the mannequin sounded steady and firm under the pressure of the child's small hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. The rhythm of life moved through the room, breaking the deadly silence of the past. Tiara looked at the girl's figure, and in one cinematic moment of the mind, she saw herself 26 years earlier, the 12-year-old girl sitting helplessly on the dusty wooden floor in North Tulsa, watching her father's chest stop moving and not knowing what to do. The loop of old pain, the chain of trauma that had haunted her for almost 3 decades, was finally cut in this very room by the hands of the next generation.